morning, Pathfinders. My name is Pastor Benjamin, and I am honored to share a devotional thought with you today. And I want to talk about identity. Your identity is who you are. And when you know who you are, there is no limit to what you can do and where you can go. I was flying out of Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport a number of years ago, and I was heading to the airport. My wife was going to drop me off, and when I got to the curb to leave the car and head into the airport to catch my flight, I took all of my bags and I put all my bags on the curb like everybody does, and I had this sinking feeling in my stomach, and I just felt like something was missing. And sure enough, I looked around the car and I had forgotten my computer bag at the house. And it wasn't so much that my computer was missing, but I also knew that my wallet in my computer bag was missing. And inside my wallet was my identification. And so I realized quickly that I wasn't going to be able to catch my flight. And so I went inside to the ticket counter and I asked the attendant, "Can you rebook me on a flight? I forgot my wallet at home." And he looked at me and said, with no hesitation, "Sir, you know that if you don't have your identification, you cannot fly." And I said, "I know." And so he rebooked me on a later flight, and I went home, got my identification, came back to the airport, and I caught my flight later in the day. And here's one thing that I have learned is that without your identification, there are things that you will not be able to do with your life. And there are places that your life will never go unless you know who you are. But when you know who you are, there is no limit to what God can do in you and through you and where you can go with your life. So many people base their identification, who they are, on three things: what they can do, what they own, or what other people say about them. And the problem with that is if you base your identity on what you can do, you could get an injury. And that great skill that you have may not be able to last if you get injured. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you can do that thing forever. And you can't base your identity on what you own, because what you own, it could be a house or a car, whatever it is, what you could own one day may not be with you in a week or in a month. And you can't base your identity on what people say about you. There are people who may say great things when they're in front of you, but they may say unkind things when they are behind your back. And it's unfortunate when that happens, but once in a while it does. So we have to be able to know who we are beyond what we can do, the things we own, or what people say about us. You will find your identity in a relationship with God. And when you know God, you will know who you are. And I want you to think about when Jesus was baptized in Matthew chapter 3, one of the most amazing moments in Scripture. I would have loved to have been at the baptism of Jesus. And so Jesus is baptized, and I'm not sure if any of you have been baptized or you're thinking about being baptized, but Jesus was baptized. He went all the way under the water, and when he came up out of the water, the Bible says that Jesus heard the voice of God the Father saying to him, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." So in that little moment, God the Father is saying to his Son, "You are my Son. And because you are my Son, I am pleased with you." Jesus hadn't done any miracles, healings, ministry that we know of at that point. That was really the launch of his public ministry. And so it wasn't that Jesus had earned the love of the Father. It's that the Father always loved the Son, and the Son belonged to the Father. And Jesus was loved, and God was pleased with Jesus because Jesus belonged to him. I just want to encourage you that God is pleased with you because you belong to him. He calls you son, and he calls you daughter, and you don't ever have to worry about trying to earn your worth and value or losing your worth and value. God has already given you maximum worth and value in your life because you belong to him. You are part of his family. You are his son. You are his daughter, and you are beloved and loved and cared for and cherished and wanted. And so when you think about that beautiful moment, it was so important when Jesus launched his ministry. He had to know his identity. He had to know who he was. And he knew who he was because he knew what God the Father thought and said about him. If you ever doubt your identity, if you ever wonder, am I really valuable? Am I really important? Do I have worth? Go back to what God the Father says about you, and he calls you his beloved, and you are loved, and you are cherished, and he does care about you, regardless of what may be happening around your life. And Jesus, from his baptism, he went out into the wilderness, and Satan tried to undermine the identity of Jesus by asking him if you really are God's son, when just a little bit earlier, God had said to Jesus, you are my son. And Satan will often try to put little doubts into your head that make you question your identity and who you are. And I just want to encourage you, don't question who you are. Don't let those doubts sink into your mind and heart. You know who you are. Scripture tells you who you are. You are God's son, and you are God's daughter, and he is pleased with you, and he calls you his beloved. When you know who you are, there is no limit to what God can do in you and through you and where you can go with your life. And so I just hope that will sink in, and that you Pathfinders can be confident in who you are, regardless of whether you have good days or bad days. You can know who God says you are. And just like when I showed up at the airport, when you have your identification, you can go on the most incredible journey and experience the most incredible things and leave the most incredible impact on the world. So know who you are. Remember who you are. You are God's son, and you are God's daughter. You're loved. He's pleased with you. Don't forget it.
Hey Pathfinders, Adael here. I just want to say thank you so much for being with me these last 2 weeks. Though my time with you was short, I hope you learned something new about the world of paint. So now, as we reach the end, I hope you give painting a chance, even if you're not good at it. Because no matter what you make, it's going to be great. Which now brings me to the question of today. What is the difference between realistic art and abstract art? You see, realistic art is basically art that is recognizable. Let's say I decided to paint this llama. You would easily know that it's a llama because, well, it would look just like it does in real life as it would in a painting. For example, you can make a painting based off of your friends, like this. You can easily tell you have 3 friends right here. See, this is realistic art. Art that is easily recognizable to be something that exists in the world. like a landscape. I painted this landscape here in the coast of Oregon. I wanted to capture the sunset, which is exactly what I did. Abstract art is art that does not attempt to represent external reality but seeks to achieve its effect using shapes, forms, and colors and textures. It doesn't exactly represent anything that's familiar to people, but rather becomes something that is hard to identify. Now, you know the difference between abstract and realistic art, but sometimes the two can blend together. Take, for example, this painting. Now, you know that this is obviously the foreground. If you remember what foreground is by the drawing honor, you would know that this is easily recognizable as a person. This was a portrait of myself that I made last year. But you will notice that the background is not something that's easily recognizable. It doesn't really represent anything. Therefore, the background is abstract. The foreground, realistic. Background, abstract. So the two can be mixed together to blend well. There are many paintings that do this, actually. Abstract realism is the infusion of elements of design with the depiction of real life in visual arts, while abstract has no reference to real objects. Therefore, abstract realism is the bonding of realistic art while having an abstract appearance. There are many different types of forms of expressing art, but there are 4 that you need to know. Abstract, still life, landscape, and portrait. You already know what abstract is, which is basically not realistic art and that may or may not be recognizable. You also already know what self-portrait is, which is taking a person and painting them. And you know what a landscape is, which is taking a picture of land or a seascape, kind of like this. So we are going to only talk about the last one, a still life. When you're making a still life, you just need to take an inanimate object and place it under a light. You also have to pay attention to the lighting on the object and to the shadows as well. And then you just need to work with that in making your artwork. When you're done, the final product should look like this. As you can tell, I have recaptured the object and I have applied lighting and shading as well to it. So now you know the 4 types of art that you need to know. This is very important now because you have to make your own. You must make 3 art pieces, 1 being a still life, 2 being a landscape that shows linear perspective, which is basically a perspective, say for example, you have a photo of a train track. You look at the beginning of the track to the very end of the track, which hence shows a perspective of linear, taking your eye from one space to another. And you must also paint a self-portrait. It doesn't have to be a self-portrait. It could actually be a portrait of a friend or an animal. Now, I'm not going to leave you empty-handed, of course. I'm going to give you some tips on what to do in preparing for your canvas and when you're painting. So, of course, you need a pencil, because whatever you're painting, it is always important to draw first what you're seeing. Say, for example, you have a still life in front of you. You're obviously going to sketch out whatever you see. That way, you make it as accurate as possible. And let's say you make a mistake. You could just simply erase and, just try again. Another thing you should always pay attention is the lighting around you. Of course, this can be difficult because we live in a world where the sun sets and rises, so the lighting won't always be the same. So my recommendation to you is to take a photo of the object that you have in front of you. That way, you always have the photo on your phone or laptop or computer, whatever you use. Whatever device you use, it doesn't matter. As long as you have the photo, you now have a permanent copy of what the lighting is. So that way, it will be easier to just look at your phone and getting the lighting just right. Another thing too that is important is also before you decide drawing, is to decide what kind of canvas do you want. Do you want a canvas that's hard like this? Do you want a small one? Or would you like a big one? Depending on what you want to make. It doesn't matter. Just let the paint guide you, Let your creativeness guide you. You can also have these types of canvas where it's it has the texture, but as you can tell, very flimsy. You could also use a wooden board. Those are also helpful as well. You may not even need a stand to paint also. You can also do it on the table. It is important that no matter where you're at, you have a surface that you can paint on. Of course, on a table it's a little harder because you don't want to get the paint table dirty, do you know? So my recommendation of what I do is that I will take just extra sheets of paper, maybe you have, some towels or something around the table. That way you can just always have a clean space. It is also important on what you have next to your canvas as well. The supplies that you'll be needing. Whatever brushes you have, just have them all with you constantly. That way you could just simply, have them next to you and just switch right there whenever you want to use a different brush for a different reason or purpose. It is also important to have a small little container or cup filled with water. That way you can wash up your brushes anytime you want. It's important that your brushes are well washed before using again, because if you just mix the paints together, they're not going to get the color you may need or want. Say for example, I have a plate, and let's say I have my paints here. Now, when I am using my brush and I paint on my canvas, I don't want those paints to be mixed with another paint that I'll be needing that may not want that color. So I will use my little container and wash the brush off. Make sure to also dry it properly when you're done. Maybe with a towel, paper towel, doesn't really matter. As long as you dry your brush, that is fine. But of course, don't dry your brush too much, because when you are painting, you also need a wet surface. So make sure your brush is a little wet while you paint. But you're probably wondering, what colors am I supposed to mix together? This is when your color wheel is needed. If you remember making your color wheel will have all the colors in the circle. You'll notice that if you take red and yellow, they'll mix colors together. So if you need a color, just remember to know which colors will be able to be used in certain times and experiences. For example, if I needed black, but not completely black, for example, if I'm making this, I would need to mix a little bit of white with the black. That way I can get this kind of shade. But I want you to quickly know that don't beat yourself up if you feel like you can't mix certain colors to the exact color, because sometimes it's impossible to do that, and that's okay. Just do the best you can do. I know there's a lot of rules, but in the end of the day, just enjoy yourself painting. Because without fun, there's no painting really. And don't you ever tell yourself that you cannot paint, or don't ever tell yourself that painting isn't just for me. We all have our own different ways of expressing art, and sometimes others are more benefited than most. But don't let that get you. Always practice and always keep trying, because one day you're going to find yourself a master at painting. Now, if painting is not your style, that is okay. There are many different ways and forms of expressing art, like watercolor, oil painting, drawing, crayons, markers. There are so many ways. Even digital art is one other way of forming and expressing. But they all follow these simple steps of color. Color is very important no matter what. But I ask to give painting a chance. It is a great way of expressing art and one of the most popular ways. But I see you may be still a little bit confused. So let's get back to the canvas, and I'll show you a few tricks that you may need in your painting. When it comes to painting, I recommend starting with the background first. Always the background, because if you paint the foreground or the middle ground first, you may find yourself troubled in trying to paint precisely around these edges, and you may mess up the foreground. So it's better to start with background and then work through the middle ground and then work through the foreground. It's very important you know that, because it may save you a lot of time than putting little details, Another thing that comes in handy is the photo that you may be using. It's always better to print out the photo, that way you can actually paint on the paper. Try getting the colors exactly as they are on the paper as it is on the painting, And of course, another thing that you need to always remember is don't try to be hardcore. Like, don't try so hard to get something like this. Like, my painting isn't exactly the same thing as photorealistic. Don't try to go photorealistic. Just do with what you can do, And once again, I say that you can tell yourself that, this may not be for me or something, and that may be true. But don't ever Don't ever believe that until you've given it your hardest and given it your best. Some people may say that, but I don't believe it. I don't believe that you can't express your art in every aspect. It is possible if you try. If you don't want to try, that's okay. But just know that it is possible for you to work hard enough to get something like this, or to get something even better. It is always possible. All things through Christ we can do. Let's talk about some of the things that you can paint on your canvas for what you need to paint. Some of the things, for example, still life. You can paint maybe your favorite toy, something that you like, maybe something that has meaning to you. Whatever it is, you can use it. It doesn't just have to be just a basic apple and an orange or a little flower arrangement. It can be something cool, you know? As for a portrait, it can be like a photo of your friends. It doesn't have to be just in the moment, you know? Like, for example, you have this right here. This is a painting I showed just earlier. Is a painting of me and my friends. Of course, you know, there's me, there's my friends, right here. Now, it doesn't look just as realistic as photo, which is the point that I'm trying to make. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that detailed. Just do the best that you can do, and you'll do just fine no matter what. Even if you make a mistake, that's okay, because we don't make mistakes. Just like Bob Ross said, we make happy accidents. As for the landscape, that's a little harder, because it's not just any landscape you're making a linear landscape. If you don't know what that is still, you can always look it up online, what linear landscape is. And I'm sure it'll explain it way better than I could. And now we are going to discuss the very last thing. Psalms 19, verse 1.
The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims his handiwork. Psalms 19, verse 1. How does this verse inspire your artwork? How does it relate? To me, God is the great designer, the first and true artist. The universe is his canvas, and we are a part of it. For the grass that grows on the ground to the highest clouds in the sky, they are all made from his hands. The nature around us is the expression of art from God called love. This inspires my artwork because if painting can give me just a piece of what God felt when creating me, if it can draw me any closer to him, I want to take that chance. This is my takeaway from this verse. What does this verse mean to you?
And that is all the time I have for you on the painting honor. I really hope you guys learned something, and please carry on with your journey through Christ, and with, hopefully, your journey on painting. I pray that you have an amazing rest of your week, and hopefully, I'll see you again sometime in the future. My name is Adael, and thank you for giving me the time to teach you the painting honor.
I'm Barb Thomas, coming back to you. We are ready to do segment number 2 tonight. So get out your sewing machines, and we're going to get them plugged in so we can get going.
So this sewing machine happens to be mechanical. I'm going to show a mechanical and then also an electronic machine. Basically, the difference is the mechanical machines, you have to choose for yourself what stitch it is that you want to sew out. After you've done that, then you need to set what's called the stitch width and stitch length for yourself. The machine does not do it for you, unfortunately. You have to do that by yourself. The advantage to an electronic machine is that instead of having knobs or selection levers, it is push button, and you simply tell it what stitch you want, type it in, and it's going to sew that stitch for you. There's no guesswork, which is very nice. Okay, we're going to start with the mechanical machine. All sewing machines have a foot control, so we're going to go ahead and plug it in, and this happens to plug over in the side. Foot control goes on the floor. The power cord comes out of the machine, and then we're going to plug that in. On this model, the on-off switch is over on the machine. The first click is machine on full speed, and then the next click is half speed. So if you've never used a sewing machine before, I would recommend using the half speed so that you don't go too fast. I'm going to set it back for myself. On a sewing machine, there always has to be two threads. There is the top thread, and there is what we call the bottom thread, or the bobbin. And this particular model uses a metal bobbin. And I'm going to go through some of the working parts, and then we're going to wind thread onto that bobbin, and then we'll get going. We're going to do a straight stitch. So on this model, I'm going to set it down here to where my stitch number 1 is straight stitch. And then this over here is my zigzag. And when I'm doing straight stitch, I don't want any zigzag, which means I don't want any stitch width. So this has to be always at 0 for straight. If I want it to zag, then all I have to do is turn it off as 0, and I will have zigzag. This knob in the front moves my needle back and forth. And I prefer to have the needle in the center, which means that lever would be straight up and down. My buttonhole maker, if I chose to make buttonholes. And then this is stitch length. So depending on what brand and model you have, an easy way to figure out where to set the stitch length knob is halfway in between. So this goes to 5, halfway in between is 2.5. That's going to be a medium stitch length, which is average. Sometimes we need to go sew in reverse. On this machine, in order to reverse, I'm just going to hold the lever up. You have to hold it up while you're going backwards, and then when you want to sew forwards again, you just simply let go. On a sewing machine, there is a hand wheel. So the hand wheel always has to turn towards you. On your paper that showed what your requirements were, they call this a balance wheel. It's actually called a hand wheel. Hand wheel controls the take-up lever. The take-up lever controls the needle going up and down. So when you turn this hand wheel, you always want to make sure it goes towards you, never backwards, always forward. So this take-up lever then hooks to the needle. So then there is the presser foot and a presser foot lifter. So directly back here in the back is a lever that if you lift up, that puts your presser foot in the up position. Or if you lower it down, then of course that's down and ready to sew. You aren't ever going to want to sew with that in the up position, or there will be nothing holding your fabric in place. There also will be no tension, no pressure on the fabric, and no tension. And that's what this knob up here is for. So the thread is going to come down through here, and this knob here applies pressure. So if you have this anywhere except red on red, it's not going to be the right tension, and you'll have a funny looking stitch. Underneath your presser foot, this is what we call a throat plate, and then there are feed dogs that will feed the fabric through. On your throat plate, you have different marks. So with your seam guide, and where your center needle position is. So right there is where my center needle is. This first little mark would be my 1/4 inch. And so every machine is a little different, but they do have all kinds of markings there. And so make sure that you know for yourself which each of those lines represent. Okay, let's go ahead and wind a bobbin. On this particular model, we're just going to go from our spool around the front. It's going to crisscross in the back, and then I'm going to start in the back and wind 3 or 4 times around, and I'm going to push the button and it's going to wind. This will stop when it's all the way full. I'm just going to wind it about that's actually probably good. And then over here on the side is a thread cutter, so then I can just cut that thread. The bobbin lives down in the inside, down in the front, and inside of there is also what we call a bobbin case. And this is sort of a tricky part, getting the bobbin and bobbin case in so it's going in the right direction. If the thread is coming over the top away from you, I put it into the bobbin case. Right here is a little slit, so the thread has to go into that slit, and then I'm pulling forward until it snaps into place back inside of here. This is a lever that I can hang on to so that the bobbin won't fall out. However, if you want the bobbin to come out, you have to remember to let go of that lever. And then this little fork or finger goes to the top, and I'm just going to put it inside of there. And then this tail will bring up to the top before we sew. So that takes care of our bobbin thread. Then we're going to go ahead and thread the top. You never want to thread the top with your presser foot in the down position. It always needs to be up. So what that does is makes this clamp open up so that when the thread comes through here, back to front, through here, that disc is open up. Right to left, behind here, and then through the eye. Just like in hand sewing, if you cut your thread at a diagonal, then that will make it much easier for you to be able to put the thread through the eyeball. Thread goes from the front to the back, and then we're going to put it through the little slit in the foot, and then we need to pick up our bobbin thread. So again, we turn our hand wheel towards us. The take-up lever goes all the way down, all the way back up. And then if I pull on this top thread, there is my bobbin thread. And before I can sew, I always have to have two threads over here at the side. And this one does have a thread cutter over on the top left side, which I can use to be able to clip my thread. So on your requirement sheet, you need to know about sewing machine needles. Needles come in kinds and they come in sizes. So the kind of needle is the universal. This is a quilting needle. And then the sizes are down here. The smaller the number, the lighter the weight the fabric. Numbers getting bigger, so 90-14 would be heavier. And then there are the kinds of needles. So the 70-10 I would use for like a sheer, something see-through. The 80-12 would be for a blouse weight, medium weight. 90-14 would be a lightweight pant. If you were doing jeans, it's a 100/16, and then it keeps going up for a heavier fabric. The kind of needle represents the tip of the needle. How is this tip going to poke through the fabric? So universal needle, the tip is partially rounded, partially sharp. That's perfect for flannel, perfect for linen, something that has a looser weave to it. If I were sewing something with a real tight weave, like a 200 count per cale sheet, I would want to use a sharp needle. Sharp needle, this tip is completely pointed and it will actually poke a hole. There are jeans needles, there are quilting needles, just about every kind of needle you can imagine. And then when you change it, needles have a flat side. Flat side goes to the back if your machine has a bobbin in the front. So if the bobbin drops down from the top or if it loads from the front, you loosen the screw, this needle will slide down, the new one slides back up, and you tighten the screw. Flat side goes to the back. Okay, now we're moving over to an electronic machine. It too has a foot control. This particular model, the foot control plugs directly back here into the back. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Foot control goes down on the floor. And the power source plugs into the side on this particular model. And then that is also where the on-off switch is. Hand wheel is also in the same place. Hand wheel controls, again, your take-up lever and the eye of the needle. Presser foot lifter on this model is on the inside right-hand side. And it's just a little lever that you're going to raise and lower in order to get the foot up and down. On this model, the presser foot goes on and off a little differently. There is a button in the back, and if you push it towards you, then that makes the foot fall off. And then in order to get this foot back on, all your presser feet will have a little bar that goes through here, and you simply line up the bar so that when you lower the foot down, it is lined up and it's just going to snap right into place. So again, to take it off, you push that down, center the bar underneath this little section there, lower the foot on top of it. If it's not exactly in the right spot, move the foot and then it will attach. Feed dogs are underneath the foot on this particular model. In order for those dogs to go down, there's a lever back here in the back. So if you ever wanted to sew on a button with your machine, you could drop those feed dogs down. We're going to start by winding the bobbin on the electronic machine. So from your spool, all sewing machines have a bobbin winder doohickey. So we're going to go from our spool around the front. It's going to crisscross in the back side and then go over to your bobbin. And we're going to start in the middle of the bobbin and take the thread up through the hole. Put it back on the bobbin winder mechanism. Push it over to the right. I'm putting my foot on the foot control, which is going to make the bobbin turn. And I'm holding on to this thread. And as I wind, that thread is just going, the tail is going to come off. And then I can toss it aside. And we need to wind half full or so. It will stop when it's all the way full. Okay, I've cut the thread, so now our bobbin is wound, and it, on this model of machine, actually has a top drop-in bobbin. So there is an arrow here. Push that little lever to the right, and then the cap to where the bobbin case goes comes out. And then your bobbin has to sit down in the inside. So one of my students taught me that if you make the letter P, so here's my circle and my tail going down, that I put the bobbin in, and then on this model, I'm just going to follow the arrow. So I continue along all the way around, and it actually will cut the thread for me when I'm done. If you don't have a machine that will cut the thread for you, you still have to put the P down in the inside. You still have to come around, and then when we get it threaded, we'll have to bring up that bobbin thread. So now to thread the top, we only use the bobbin winder doohickey when we're winding the bobbin, so we're not going to use it anymore. Step number 1, we're going to go from the back to the front, down through the tension disc, and this is the tension dial on this model. Number 3 is right to left. Come up and go right to left. Behind here, and then through the eye of the needle. Make sure when you're threading your machine that the presser foot is always in the up position. You don't ever want to thread it when it's down, so it needs to be up. This particular model has a built-in needle threader, which will, the thread will go around the little hook, put it into the hook there, and it'll grab it, and then there's a loop that comes out. So if I want or need to get my bobbin thread up, then I'm going to turn my hand wheel till the take-up lever goes all the way down. It's back up, and there is both threads. And so now I'm ready to sew. One of your requirements is to hem something. So I took an 18-inch piece of cotton fabric, and I'm going to show you how to be able to hem. It says you can do a towel or an apron. Anything that you want to hem would be hemmed exactly the same way. So to hem, you're going to take your 18-inch square of fabric and go over to the iron with your seam gauge and fold up wrong side to wrong side, 1/4 of an inch up, and you're going to take the iron then and press this going all the way over. And you're going to then come back and do a second fold. Press that up another 1/4 of an inch. You can measure to make sure you've actually pressed it up, and then take the iron and make sure that that is going to stay down for you. I also advise sticking some pins in it, and the pins will go just in and out. And you notice how I like to have the heads out to the side, because this is how I'm going to sew. When you're sewing, you don't ever want to sew over top of the pins. They have to come out first, or you can damage your machine. And so I always put the pins from right to left. And then we can simply go to our sewing machine and stitch that down with a straight stitch. So on this electronic machine, if I do stitch 0, 0, my needle is going to be in the far left position, which I don't like. Stitch 0, 1 puts the needle in the center position. So I'm going to go ahead and type in stitch 1. I'm sorry, I know this is hard to see on the computer part. I need stitch 1 here. When you start to sew, you don't ever want to start with no fabric where the needle is going to hit. See how the needle's going to hit there and my fabric is not even close? Your fabric needs to be under the actual part when the needle goes down that it's actually going to hit there. We also have to decide where it is that I'm going to guide my fabric to. You notice that my fabric is not collected inside of here. All the bulk of your fabric should always be to the left of your machine, and there shouldn't be anything inside of here. I've got all kinds of markings on my machine. My 1/4 inch is right here. If I sew here though, I'm stitching here. I want to be right next door to the edge of the fabric, and so I think what I'm going to do is use the edge of my presser foot, and that is actually going to be just about perfect. Now when I start to sew, I'm going to need to somehow secure that edge, and that's done by back tacking. My reverse button is right here on this model. So when I go ahead and stitch, I'm going to stitch a few stitches forward and then hold the button in, and then it's going to go backwards and then let go of it and stitch forward. And what I'm doing is guiding the edge of the fabric right along the edge of the guide. This machine does not have a speed control, so it's controlled by how hard I push down on the foot control. Remember, we pressed it under and then we pressed it again. You can put some pins in it if that's going to help you. You notice that my fingers are not anywhere near the needle. You have to have a guide with your right hand, and then the left hand can just be kind of over here to the left. So now, when I get to this corner, you need to make sure that both sides of the corner have been turned up. I should have did this a little sooner here. Okay, this is turned up and this is... Now what this makes is kind of a bulky corner. I think we'll be okay sewing up to it. Sometimes you have to have a poker to be able to hold things in place while you're stitching. And I'm going to stitch in reverse. Let's see if it'll go. There we go. Now if I were done sewing and wanted to take this out of my machine, you can never, like right now, if I take it out and pull, it's stuck and there's a whole bunch of thread down there. The take-up lever always has to be in the up position in order to make this pull out freely. If it's not, your thread is going to get stuck. And the other thing that happens is the next time you take a stitch, if this take-up lever is not in the far up position, the eye of your needle is going to come unthreaded, and that is so annoying. Now I'm ready to sew down the other half. This corner here is quite bulky, so you could try stitching here, back tacking, go ahead and sew. What I have found is that on bulky corners, it's better to start a little forward, and then I can simply just sew in reverse for a little bit. And once you have taken care then of that corner, then you can just continue on, and you're going to repeat the whole thing, doing all 4 sides. So when you're done, take up lever always to the very top. Then we can take our thread out. We can cut the thread. And so this then is your hemming. We have hemmed a cloth napkin, and you can use it then for the next meal you eat.